A citizen militia of just 10,000 men charged headlong into the amphibious invasion force of the largest empire on Earth, completely lacking cavalry or archers. By all conventional military logic of the ancient world, advancing into an open plain against a numerically superior combined arms superpower should have resulted in immediate annihilation. How did a desperate band of heavy infantry flip the tactical script and crush an imperial vanguard on the shores of Attica? Today, we unmask the tactical physics and command decisions that turned the Battle of Marathon into a master class of infantry warfare. Report for duty with a like and subscribe for next week's Grand Assault. In the late summer of 490 BC, the Achaemenid Persian Empire stretched from the borders of India to the edges of Europe. King Darius I commanded vast resources, and his strategic vision was set on retribution. Years earlier, the fiercely independent city-states of Athens and Eretria had provided military support to a failed rebellion in Ionia against Persian regional authority. The rebellion was brutally crushed, but the geopolitical insult to the imperial throne remained unresolved. To punish these transgressors, a massive expeditionary force was assembled under the dual command of the Median admiral Datis and the Persian noble Artaphernes. This was not merely a frontier raiding party. It was a highly organized, heavily supplied amphibious operation designed to project overwhelming imperial power across the Aegean Sea. Their logistical capability was staggering, utilizing specialized transport vessels to move thousands of men and precious cavalry horses across open water. After systematically subduing intervening island nations and violently sacking the city of Eretria, enslaving its surviving population, the Persian fleet turned its prow toward Athens. They required a suitable landing site, one that could accommodate the draft of their supply ships and provide their critical cavalry squadrons the wide, flat space necessary to deploy effectively. Guided by Hippias, a bitter and exiled former tyrant of Athens who sought to reclaim his lost power, the Persian armada dropped anchor in the Bay of Marathon. The Marathon plain offered a wide, crescent-shaped expanse of relatively flat coastal ground, located roughly 26 miles northeast of the Athenian capital. It was bordered by impassable marshes to the north and rugged foothills to the west and south, making it an ideal geographical staging ground for a cavalry-heavy imperial army. In immediate response, the Athenian Democratic Assembly mobilized their entire available heavy infantry force. Approximately 10,000 citizen soldiers, known as hoplites, marched out with urgent speed to block the mountain passes leading from the plain into the heart of Attica. Supreme military command rested nominally with the polemarch Callimachus, but the tactical vision of the campaign was driven by a seasoned general named Miltiades. Miltiades intimately understood Persian military doctrine and operational habits from his own prior service alongside them in earlier campaigns. Before departing, Athens had dispatched a swift runner named Philippides to Sparta, requesting urgent military intervention. However, strict religious festivals delayed the legendary Spartan army from marching until the next full moon, leaving the Athenians dangerously isolated. They were soon joined by an unexpected but vital contingent of 1,000 hoplites from the small, fiercely loyal allied city of Plataea. Totaling roughly 11,000 men, the Greek coalition established a highly defensible, fortified encampment on the rugged lower slopes of Mount Pentelicon. They effectively choked off the main arterial road leading to Athens, forcing a strategic bottleneck that the Persian commanders could not easily bypass. For several agonizing days, a tense and static standoff paralyzed the valley. The mechanics of ancient warfare often hinged heavily on logistics, supply lines, and terrain friction as much as raw kinetic combat. The Greeks steadfastly refused to descend from the high ground into the open terrain of the plain. Moving on to flat, unbroken ground would expose their rigid, densely packed formations to the highly mobile and lethal flanking maneuvers of the Persian cavalry. Conversely, Datis hesitated to order his lighter armored imperial troops up the rocky, uneven slopes to assault a fortified wall of heavy bronze armor. The Persian logistical framework began to strain severely under the realities of the delay. Maintaining tens of thousands of men and hundreds of horses on a contested, narrow beachhead required vast daily amounts of fresh water and forage. The local water sources near the northern marsh were difficult to secure and quickly became contaminated or exhausted. Simultaneously, a strategic clock was ticking relentlessly against the imperial commanders.
The mountain block holds.
Datis was acutely aware that the Spartan army would eventually march.
And here we break them.
He knew that their arrival would drastically alter the strategic balance of power in favor of the Greeks. He needed to break the operational stalemate before the opposing force could consolidate. He chose a high-risk, deeply ambitious operational pivot. Historical evidence and subsequent tactical shifts imply that, under the cover of darkness, the Persian commanders began systematically loading their crucial cavalry forces back onto the transport ships. The strategic objective was daring but clear. They intended to sail the fleet around Cape Sunion and strike directly at the unprotected, thinly garrisoned city of Athens, while the primary Greek army was pinned down at Marathon. This maneuver required leaving a substantial portion of the Persian infantry on the plain to screen the beachhead, protect the remaining logistical train, and keep the Greeks paralyzed in place. From his elevated vantage point, Miltiades observed the shifting patterns, the movement of ships, and the altered density in the Persian camp. The Persian cavalry, the single greatest existential threat to a tight infantry phalanx operating on open ground, was suddenly absent or heavily diminished. This was the decisive, fleeting window of opportunity. The entire campaign was suddenly one mistake away from complete collapse. If the Greeks attacked the remaining force and failed, their army would be destroyed and Athens would inevitably burn. If they remained defensively on the mountain, the imperial fleet would successfully bypass them and capture the city unopposed. Operating under immense psychological pressure, Miltiades passionately argued his case before the Council of Tribal Generals, ultimately convincing the Polemarch Callimachus to seize the initiative. The decision was finalized, and the Athenian tribal regiments aligned their ranks for battle. The tactical deployment of the Greek force was entirely dictated by the unforgiving mathematics of battlefield frontage. The Persian screening force stretched wide across the plain, anchoring their flanks against the natural barriers of the northern marshes and the sea. A standard Greek phalanx traditionally deployed 8 ranks deep to maximize forward momentum and physical staying power. However, if Miltiades maintained this traditional depth, his significantly smaller army would be geometrically outflanked by the wider Persian line, leading to encirclement and destruction. To solve this lethal geometric disadvantage, Miltiades ordered a radical, unprecedented restructuring of his tactical formation. He deliberately thinned his center units to merely 3 or 4 ranks deep, stripping away their physical mass and staying power. He transferred those men outward to reinforce the left and right wings, keeping the outer edges of his line at maximum depth, density, and offensive capability. This was a phenomenal psychological and tactical gamble. In ancient infantry combat, a ruptured center usually resulted in the immediate disintegration and total collapse of the entire army. How do you evaluate this commander's decision? Across the 1,500 meters of open ground, the Persian infantry stood ready to receive the assault. Their core defensive formation was built primarily around the traditional Sparabara doctrine. The front ranks carried tall, rectangular wicker shields, planting them firmly into the ground to create a continuous, semi-rigid defensive wall. Behind this protective barrier, successive ranks of highly trained archers prepared to unleash devastating, high-angle composite bow fire. It was a complex system designed to systematically dismantle and demoralize enemies at a distance before engaging in close-quarters mopping-up actions. The Greeks began their advance into the vast expanse of the plain. They marched in measured, disciplined cadence, deliberately conserving their physical energy under the crushing weight of their bronze and wood equipment. Each hoplite carried a large, convex wooden shield faced with bronze, known as the aspis. Along with heavy bronze greaves, a Corinthian-style helmet, a secondary sword, and a primary thrusting spear called the doru, each man bore roughly 50 to 70 pounds of restrictive gear. As the advancing line crossed the critical 200-meter mark, they entered the maximum effective range of the Persian killing zone. The sky rapidly darkened with thousands of incoming shafts. To minimize their agonizing exposure to the relentless, plunging archery barrage, the Greek command ordered the line to break into a run. This aggressive, sudden escalation of speed was highly unusual for heavily armored infantry, requiring immense physical conditioning and strict unit discipline to maintain a cohesive front line. Arrows rained down in overlapping waves, striking the formation with terrifying auditory impact. Most of the composite shafts shattered harmlessly or glanced off the curved bronze faces of the tightly interlocking shields. The raw kinetic physics of the impending collision heavily favored the mass and momentum of the attackers. The heavy bronze vanguard crashed violently into the static Persian wicker wall. Wood splintered. Flesh tore. The lines slammed together. The Sparabara shields simply could not absorb or deflect the massive, concentrated mass displacement of thousands of charging heavy infantrymen. The long, heavy ashwood doru held a significant reach advantage over the shorter Persian throwing spears and Akinakes short swords. Greek thrusts deliberately targeted the unprotected throats, faces, and groins of the imperial infantry, bypassing their scale armor. However, the sheer numerical weight and seasoned discipline of the Persian center, composed of their elite native and Saka troops, quickly began to assert itself against the weakened Greek middle. The combat rapidly deteriorated into a brutal, suffocating, and terrifyingly close-quarters grind. Inside their restrictive bronze helmets, Greek soldiers gasped desperately for air in the stifling late-summer heat. Thick dust choked the lungs, while spilled blood quickly turned the dry earth into treacherous, slippery mud. The dangerously thinned Greek center could not mechanically sustain the forward momentum against the deeper Persian mass. Physical exhaustion, rising casualties, and relentless frontal pressure forced the Athenian center to reluctantly yield ground. The center bent backward, retreating step by bloody step, bowing inward like a strained bowstring. The Persian elite troops eagerly pressed their perceived advantage, pushing deeper and deeper into the retreating Greek formation. They confidently believed they were systematically breaking the Athenian line and securing victory. They were actually stepping blindly into a meticulously designed attritional trap. On the extreme edges of the battlefield, the heavily reinforced and exceptionally deep Greek wings crashed with devastating force into the weaker, less motivated Persian conscript levies. The heavy phalanx easily and violently overwhelmed the lightly equipped imperial flankers. Unable to halt the relentless forward pressure of the deeply stacked Greek shields, the Persian wings structurally shattered. Unit cohesion failed completely. The levies broke their ranks and routed in blind panic toward the perceived safety of the shoreline and the waiting ship. The battlefield geometry had drastically and irreversibly shifted. The victorious Greek wings, having thoroughly crushed their direct opponents, did not succumb to bloodlust or blindly pursue the fleeing flankers into the marshlands. Strict, remarkable command discipline held the citizen militia formation together in the chaos of victory. Following a pre-arranged tactical doctrine, the wings physically halted their forward advance, dressed their lines, and pivoted inward. They executed a highly complex, synchronized turning maneuver toward the chaotic center of the battlefield. The overextended Persian elite troops, who had successfully pushed the Greek center backward, suddenly found themselves enclosed by hostile bronze. The Greek wings rapidly closed the jaws of a massive, coordinated double envelopment. This maneuver radically altered the physics and lethality of the engagement. Mass displacement reversed violently against the Persians. The imperial center was suddenly compressed relentlessly from three sides simultaneously. Severe compression in ancient infantry warfare is almost universally lethal. As the impenetrable Greek shield walls closed in tightly, the Persian soldiers physically lost the required space to draw their bows, swing their swords, or even breathe properly. They were packed so densely that defensive maneuvers and organized resistance became structurally impossible. The immense psychological strain of being fully surrounded rapidly shattered their remaining combat morale. Panic rippled uncontrollably through the trapped imperial ranks. This could still end in a desperate breakout. Then it broke. The elite Persian center dissolved completely into a chaotic, disorganized, and desperate scramble toward the Bay of Marathon. The previously disciplined phalanx now dissolved into a lethal, aggressive pursuit, chasing the fleeing imperial troops through the hazardous marshlands and directly into the surf. The final, most desperate phase of the battle occurred violently at the water's edge. Terrified imperial soldiers fought frantically to launch their heavy, grounded transport ships, while heavily armored Greek hoplites waded deep into the waves in a bloody attempt to burn them. Persian archers fired furiously and indiscriminately from the high wooden decks to cover the frantic withdrawal of their comrades. The fighting in the crashing surf was horrific, chaotic, and intimately brutal. It was in this chaotic shoreline struggle that the Athenian polemarch Callimachus was struck down, taking multiple arrows while heroically attempting to board and secure a fleeing vessel. Despite the fierce, desperate rearguard action, the vast bulk of the Persian transport fleet managed to cast off, leaving only 7 ships captured by the Greeks in the blood-stained shallows. Silence eventually fell over the heavily scarred and debris-strewn sands of Marathon. The raw tactical lethality of the well-disciplined Greek heavy infantry over lightly armored ranged troops was completely undeniable. Ancient historians recorded roughly 6,400 Persian dead left scattered on the plain and in the marshes, compared to a remarkably low official toll of 192 Athenians and 11 Plataeans. While ancient casualty figures are frequently subject to patriotic inflation, The catastrophic structural breakdown of lightly armored forces caught within a tight envelopment clearly produced a heavily skewed and devastating casualty rate. Yet the overarching strategic crisis for the Greek survival had not yet passed. The powerful Persian fleet was still largely intact, and Datis was already sailing south, racing across the waves to strike the presumably undefended city of Athens. Denying themselves any chance for physical rest or extended celebration, the deeply exhausted Greek citizen soldiers hastily formed their ranks. They immediately began a grueling, agonizing 26-mile forced march back to their vulnerable city under the oppressive heat of the Greek sun. They arrived at the coastal defensive heights just as the Persian armada finally appeared on the shimmering horizon. Seeing the very same heavy infantrymen who had just utterly shattered his vanguard already manning the city's defenses, Datis realized he had lost the operational race. He formally ordered the fleet to turn away, retreating humiliated back to the coast of Asia. The Battle of Marathon offers an early, brilliant example of tactical ideas seen again in later warfare, proving the devastating potential of terrain management, strategic patience, and envelopment maneuvers. It did not permanently end the imperial threat to the Greek mainland, as King Xerxes would return with an even larger force 10 years later. However, it irrevocably shattered the psychological myth of Persian invincibility and proved that a citizen militia could outmaneuver an empire. What war topic should we break down in the next video?